Okay, well, my apologies for this late start, but still, I want to congratulate and compliment, in fact, Steve Young and his team. I've been involved with them in their program for several years now. It's been a joy. It's a really prodigious program, to say the least. Um, so, in any case, let me get you into this thing to play. Okay. I'm going to focus my first remarks here on the so-called science model. I've been in this business for a long time. I did my first research in 1957 when I was in graduate school, quite a long time ago now. And it was actually in this area, just taking the gut contents of a chinchilla animal, putting into a rabbit to see if I could change this dietary fiber digestion. And sure enough, it doubled it. It was very, very exciting, really got me hooked. But in any case, so I'm in the space called science, as you may know. And science has a very special meaning for me because this is all new territory for me at that time. I mean, I didn't really know anything. But getting into the science model, I saw some very exciting opportunities to learn things. Let me start off then with a statement that I've recently seen written by Neil Tyson, who's the director of the Hayden Planetarium. It really fits perfectly what I've come to believe too. We own opinions, we don't own facts. I really like that statement because what it really says, especially in territory like this, let's try to get the facts that none of us own. They're just plain facts. That's just that simple. So research, experimental research, if you will, which has occupied most of my time, really is converting opinions into facts. And so just to give you a little more information on that idea, we start out with an uncertain observation. We become curious, skeptical, whatever, and we want to know something about it. And that's why we started research. And I'm talking about, when I talk about research, I'm talking about experimental research in a laboratory, actually formally investigating this particular question. And so that's more or less the first stage. And then to formalize this activity of learning something, we make a hypothesis, make a suggestion, essentially, of an explanation for the thing that we're seeing, this uncertainty. Then, of course, in due course, sorry about this, I got to pull down just out of the way here. Okay, so we do research that most importantly is transparent to everyone. We don't do it in secret. We do the research, and we're expected to share what we're thinking and how we're doing it with anyone who wants to know. And in that research effort, one central ingredient is to control our biases. And that means especially our own personal biases. So those are two really important features. I've rather liked it because it kind of removes the personality part of personal feelings out of it. And so this is the model, in fact, that NIH uses, who funded all of my research over the years. So we do the research, and then we get the results, make some interpretations and findings. And then we submit it for professional review. At that time, publish it, and then it becomes so-called peer-reviewed literature. I'm telling you this because I've become troubled, quite frankly, about what has happened in the plant-based community over the years. It was back in 1990s, actually. I was attempting to teach a course in this sort of area, and I got some funding to invite a total for the next 6 years, a total of 32 visitors, speakers. And and 6 of them were said to be vegan, vegetarian, if you will. And so I was really interested in bringing in some colleagues at that time to kind of share these experiences that I've been having for some 34 years with this concept called vegetarianism. And a number, as I say, I brought in 32 altogether over that 6-year period. And there were several that came in and learned some things, and somehow I didn't succeed because they left, went to do their own thing. And one of them got involved in talking about supplements as a means to nutrition and trying to sell some supplements and then put my name on some of their papers. It was really kind of an ugly situation, to be honest about it. Another one wanted to talk about the question concerning the morality of eating animals, which is fair enough. I came from a farm milking cows, and so that was kind of new to me, but nonetheless, that's a fair opportunity to do things. But then once they get into that thing, and if that's the only thing, and we don't talk about science, kind of loses me. And then still another person that I had to come in here at the time went off and then started collecting a lot of isolated facts, if you will, and then talking about them, one by one by one by one. It doesn't work that way. That's not the way that nutrition really works. And because then we end up sort of choosing the fact we may want to have some personal liking to, and talking about it in essentially in isolation. What it turned out for me in this whole effort over the years is that the kind of things that go on in our body from a biological perspective, from a biochemical and physiological perspective, which is my territory, what I came to know, or to really come to believe, was that all these things that are going on that we talk about from time to time, and there are zillions of events and factors and causes and outcomes and stuff like that, in reality, they work together. They work together. And by taking out one at a time as call it a fact, and then going on and making a big discussion about one fact as if it's acting in isolation, that's typical of the entire clinical and medical community, which I don't particularly care for, but it's the way it is. So this is science, and now I want to show you some of the key things that I did with the years to get me into this space of so-called science. The end game was, after some time now, I end up with this here expression here about nutrition, and I have a very different perspective on nutrition when it's typically told. And when I say typically told, I'm talking about my own community in nutritional science, nutritional biochemistry, but it's also very different from the medical community, the clinical community. And so I'm summarizing here just quickly, and I'll come back to this, that nutrition is best seen and understood and explained, if you will. Understanding, first off, there are multiple nutrients in food. They're involved in processes in our body, whether it's creating disease or curing disease or whatever it's doing. A lot of nutrients. I'm talking about not just a few dozen, I'm talking about thousands, millions of, when you talk about nutrients and the analogs that they may have. Quite frankly, kind of working together. That's the exciting point of view. And each nutrient tends to use multiple mechanisms to do its work. So that combination of all these nutrients, endless nutrients, and each one of them have endless mechanisms to work. It's like a cloud. They create a cloud and it creates a response. And then in turn, it affects multiple disease endpoints. We shouldn't be divided up disease so much. I mean, it's helpful to some extent to know the difference between heart disease and cancer, of course, or something like that. But in reality, we take away, when you do that kind of thing, talking about one at a time, we take away the perspective on comprehensiveness, when in reality, nutrition operates comprehensively. So, working on one disease at a time, I say, it's kind of helpful in a way to learn things, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that what may work for one obviously may work for a whole lot of others. And that's where I ended up, at least. And of course, in the end of the day, we prevent a variety of diseases and we see multiple health improvements. And so I ended up, as was explained in the intro, that with this concept that I rather liked, that I call whole food plant-based. That statement there, for me, it represents the comprehensiveness I'm talking about. And also at the same time, it's simple. I mean, I think this idea of nutrition is really quite simple. It's been made complicated by all the factors we tend to focus on one at a time, which is crazy. So in any case, I call whole food plant-based diet, and I'll come back and make that the point of my discussion here, whole and plant-based, those two concepts. Okay, so now, again, for a little bit of background, I came from this into this story from a radically different point of view. I was raised on a farm, milking cows, and I was a hunter and fished and all that sort of thing. So when I came to school and finally eventually in graduate school in Cornell University, I did a thesis, my doctorate at least, on a thesis of encouraging animal protein consumption. After all, that's what we do on the farm. We make milk, we eat meat and so forth. And So I ended up doing a PhD thesis on essentially working with cows and sheep, if you will, encouraging a means by which I don't want to go into that, a means by which we should consume more animal protein. Animal protein is supposed to be high quality, so it was said. So after my graduate training, then and a couple of years at MIT, I then was at Virginia Tech, being responsible, coordinator, I should say, coordinator of a project in the Philippines run by the State Department on developing a model for feeding malnourished children. And at that time, the United States seemed to have had a kind of particular interest in this area in large measure because the dairy industry was able to provide dried milk powder to feed these kids. In any case, we had to develop a program to feed these children. And that was about that time, this is 1960s, by the way, about that time, this study came out from India on a rat study, an experimental rat study. And the results are spectacular, dramatic. Namely, they were looking at the effect of protein fed at two different levels, 20% of calories, that's high, more or less, regular to high, or 5%. And so they had two different levels of protein feeding. And then they, in turn, had animals that were destined to get cancer of the liver. It starts out with so-called hyperplastic nodules and finally form tumors. But in any case, you can see the results there. The animals fed 20% protein, 100% of them got the cancer. The ones 5%, none did. How in the world can this be? I mean, I just saw this. This is not possible. We had kids to feed. We were expected to make sure they get enough calories, first and foremost. But secondly, we were expected to actually emphasize the consumption of protein, good quality protein, like animal protein, if you will, which is consistent, as I say, with my thesis, my own personal background. But here you can see this. The Indian workers themselves did not believe this, the researchers. They went back and did it. They changed the study design a little bit to try to prove the opposite. But I won't go down that road for the moment. Just here's what they found, that the animals fed the so-called regular or higher levels of protein, 100% got the tumors. And then, it really, this brought into this question, as I already mentioned, that, I always thought, like everybody else, especially in my PhD thesis, that increasing protein was a good idea. But here, it's looking like increasing protein increases cancer. Really striking. So I had no choice left, because here we had children to feed, you're supposed to get good quality protein, that sort of thing. I had to really get involved in doing research. And that was the beginning of my research when I applied for a grant with NIH. And I got the grant. In fact, I was really lucky to have gotten successive grants over the years, 100% of the time over many years. So this is NIH funded, I should say. And so we started out doing the research to mimic the India study and looking at the formation of the cancer within the first 12 weeks. And you can see on this plot here, the cancer starts out with a gene mutation, okay? We all assume that. Cancer starts with the mutation of the DNA, if you will, the mutation of the gene. And then you see the cancer index on the y-axis. And so we just watched to see what happens over that first 12 weeks. Mind you, I was really interested to see whether or not this Indian research was correct. And so 20% is growing in cancer very well, as you can see there. 5%, like they used, it did not. I mean, again, it was striking. I can't emphasize this enough. The Indian work had shown that 20% protein actually was associated with a higher level of cancer. Not by a little bit, 100 to nothing, essentially. So then we tried something else with my students, and most of them who were working for the doctoral dissertations. But in any case, I was interested in seeing what happens if we turn the cancer on and off, by way of changing dietary protein intake. And as you can see here, we fed 20% protein, and cancer is growing quite nicely. Give them 5% the next 3 weeks, turn it off. In other words, a really responsive kind of thing. Turning it on, turn it off, if you will. Turn it back on again. Off again. This was, to me, this was beyond the pale. But here, the cancer starts with the gene, like we all assume. But in this case, the development of the cancer thereafter is a function of how much protein is being fed, or in a broader sense, what is the nutritional conditioning, if you will. So we can turn on and turn off cancer. As I say, for me, that was almost a starting point for my real keen interest in this area of research, because who can believe this, that cancers can be so easily turned on and turned off very simply by a nutritional means. Admittedly, this is experimental animals, but that's what most research does, and in that sense, and so it eventually led me to look at humans, obviously. In a general way, what this also says is that nutrition, not the genes, controls cancer development. The reason I make that point, because this is a big deal. The cancer industry throughout the years have assumed that cancers all start with whatever affects gene mutation. That's where the idea comes from, the chemicals causing cancer. It starts out with changes in mutation. Well, in this case, it had nothing to do with that. In this case, these animals the genes are all mutated. The question of whether or not the cancer occurs or not is a function of nutrition, turning it on and off. Okay, that was I can come back at that several times as we go forward, but that was a big, big observation. So, but that was only for the first 12 weeks. So then eventually, we wanted to see what this might have to do with the lifetime of the animal. And I had another student in this particular case doing his research, 5%, 20%. And you can see over in the right-hand column there that the tumor severity, number of animals used. The tumor severity, look at the 20% compared to the 5%, huge, almost the same thing as 100-0 score. I mean, make no mistake about it. The protein turned on the cancer, and it really did it about as much as it possibly could merge about it. And the 5% animals feeding the lowest level of protein, they're all living 100 weeks. That's the lifetime. That's the lifetime for a rat. They're all living at 100 weeks. The animals fed 20% are all dead by 100 weeks. I mean, who can argue with this? This is really incredible. We can turn cancer on and off by nutritional means, simply by giving high protein and it lasted for a lifetime. Okay, so the next point I would like to make, I'm skipping over a lot of research in between, but nonetheless, hitting the high points. I became interested in this question concerning the role of plant proteins in doing this. So eventually we got around to testing a couple of plant proteins, soy protein and wheat protein, on that early cancer development. And it turned out, even when these plant proteins were fed at 20%, which turns on the cancer is 100%, and given a plant protein, it did not increase the cancer development. So all of a sudden here was a picture. Animal proteins do one thing, plant proteins do something exactly opposite. Stark, absolutely stark. So then it raised the question, at least for me at that time, was let's go beyond the question concerning whether or not animal proteins cause cancer. Imagine that really spooked my colleagues and told me not to go down that road, early in my career. So it was a very sensitive issue. The idea that animal protein, high quality animal protein, like cow's milk protein and so forth, could turn on cancer beyond the pale. I wanted to know at that time too what effect it might have on other diseases, and also wanted to know too whether plant proteins could do the same thing. So I'm going to summarize here in this slide here something that got me into the business of finding out, since this result was so staggering, so remarkable, what we want to do in this kind of area is we want to know, is it plausible? That's what we usually say. What is the mechanism by which this occurs? So what I'm showing here is a search for the possible explanation of why this occurs. And this involved a number of different students over the years. For about 12 to 15 years we were working on this. And I was at that time, I was primarily focused in pharmacological kinds of research as opposed to nutritional research. But I'm showing you here in the scheme on the left, the question concerning the development of early cancer or cancer as a whole. It's schematic, obviously. It starts out with 3 phases. That's the way we tend to divide things up. Starts out with initiation. That's when the mutation is forming. Then the cells, once mutated, then the cells start dividing, and that's during the growth phase or promotion. We call it cell expansion. Finally, we get to a point, especially in the case of humans that we know well, the cancer is migrating or metastasizing into some other tissue. That's called progression. So we have these three sort of arbitrary stages of cancer development. I'm showing it twice here. Showing the chart, the first chart at the top and then the bottom chart. And we're looking for the mechanism by which this animal protein effect is existing. And so we found some things in the aggregate over, say, about 15 years or so. First off, I'm pointing out the initiation. There's one here on the left. I'm trying to get a pointer. I don't have a pointer for this, but in any case, on the left, you can see that during the initiation stage, when the mutation is forming, the high protein diet increases the rate of entry of the carcinogen into the cell. I mean, that's a lot of work. What I've tried for years to really to prove that point, but it increases the rate of entry into the cell. And so, oh, that's what it is. Now maybe we can make a drug. We can make a drug to block the entry into our whole free. We can still use the diet we want to use. But then we kept on looking, as I say, I had this opportunity to do these different things in part because I had a number of students who are coming in and wanting to do their doctoral dissertations. And so otherwise I probably wouldn't have done it quite that way. But in any case, on another occasion, I wanted to see, what effect did this high protein diet have on the enzyme inside the cell that actually modifies the carcinogen? And what we learned was the high protein diet increases the activity of the enzyme that activates the carcinogen. It also changed the structure, two different ideas. And so it went. And then it increased the binding of the product of that metabolism to the DNA. That's the mutation thing. And of course, then we have mechanisms by which we can repair this stuff. This is going on in our bodies all the time, I can assure you. We get exposed to chemicals that might have the property of causing cancer. Unfortunately, we have something in our bodies that works all the time. It's called DNA repair. It's part of the immune system, actually. And so what the high protein diet did in this case was to actually just, decrease the good thing that we had going for us. So it increased four of them, decreased the good one we have. Now it's just during the first stage. So eventually they went to the second stage, which is reversal back and forth. You sort of know that. And again, it decreased an activity that's good for us as immune activity called natural killer cell activity. I'll get back to this in a moment. And then increase the rate at which the cells divide, increase the production of free radicals, which stimulate cancer and so forth. The growth hormone. I don't want to dwell too much time on that. Just simply to say, there's a number of mechanisms here. And so as I was working with this, I should say with my students, I wanted to do a project, maybe it would take 2 or 3 or 4 years or so. I wanted to still looking for this mechanism. Which mechanism is really, what kind of counts for this effect of animal protein on cancer? It turned out at this point in time, I finally got to a point where I realized that every time we look for a mechanism, we found one. Can you believe that? Every time we look for a mechanism, we found one. So it basically questions, if we develop a drug to try to block one of these things, is that going to do anything with all the others working? In summary, we increase the high protein diet, increase the activity of 8 mechanisms, increase our activity rates, all led toward cancer, if you will, and actually decrease the 2 mechanisms that are there for us to protect us. One is DNA repair, you see in the top chart. The other is it decreases the natural killer cell activity. So at this point, we've got 10 mechanisms, really researched quite well, quite published, all of that sort of things. We're quite satisfied with it, but then they're still looking for another mechanism we might study. And it occurred to me, wait a minute, there's something wrong here, with it's really fundamentally wrong with our thinking. Namely, as I say, increased 8 of the mechanisms, those are all in the white, and decreased 2 of them in the yellow, okay? But they all did the same thing. They all did the same thing in effect, all 10 out of 10, no exceptions, no exceptions. So that led me to a rather different idea. It got me going down the track of what is nutrition? I mean, nutrition is when in the case of animal protein, in this case, and not plant protein, but in this case, it turns out that when the protein starts to act animal protein to increase cancer, among other diseases. It doesn't just do it by one mechanism. That's the stuff for the drug therapists who want to find a drug. No, that is not the thing that we're talking about here. It increases all of it at the same time. It's the nutritional effect. So as to which mechanism really important, I couldn't say which one is and which one is not. Therefore, the idea of even theoretically sort of developing a drug to block one of these things is kind of silly. It doesn't get us any place. I'll talk more about that in my lecture tomorrow. So animal protein in reality increases cancer dramatically and actually turns on the process very fast, and it's biologically plausible, which is the concept that we like to research to see whether or not something we see whether it's really plausible. So there you have it, really shorthanded, brief description of what we found. Now let me turn your attention to something else here. Can jump ahead a little bit.